They found out that I had hemophilia when I was 2.
This is the story of Jonathan Hill,
John rolls a death save.
a young boy who discovered Dungeons & Dragons gave him a life filled with adventure.
In D&D, you can't win unless you work together as a team.
Surrounded by his best friends, John escaped his hospital bed for worlds beyond imagination.
I think one of the things the readers will find is how important my friends are to me.
I think you're ready to become a dungeon master.
This is Blood of the Paladin podcast. Hi, it's Katharine, and I can't believe that's the last time I'll be saying that this season. We've been through so much in such a short time, but we have one more very cool episode for you today with Jonathan and Patrick, as well as Ryan Gielen, who worked with Jonathan on bringing the graphic novel to life. We even have a special surprise guest that you'll have to hear to believe. All this and more on the finale of Blood of the Paladin.
Hey everybody, I'm Ryan Gielen, co-founder and chief creative director at Believe Limited with Patrick, who I'm sure you know well at this point. I met Jonathan through Deborah Charlesworth at BioMarin. Kind of saw the value of not just bringing Jonathan's story to life, but had the kind of original idea that doing it as a graphic novel might be a really powerful way to tell the story of someone who was swept away by something as visual as Dungeons and Dragons.
How were you able to listen to this story and then think about, oh, I know what I can use and mold about this story to make it into a graphic novel? Can you kind of explain a little bit about that process?
The whole thing starts with a script. The memoir is written from a first-person point of view, and the challenge to translate it into a script is you have to really identify as many powerful visuals as possible. So instead of focusing on what things may have felt like or the sort of literal, what happened first and what happened next and what happened after that, you kind of comb through the memoir trying to identify big, powerful visuals that conjure up emotion, visuals that add a lot of clarity to emotion. And once you've kind of mapped out those visuals, the hard part is done because, Jonathan did the hard part of putting everything down in a meaningful order, identifying how he felt through those times. But to translate it to a visual medium, it's the identification of those visuals that really makes all the difference. So that was the first probably 2 months of work that we did together, was combing through the memoir and saying, if we want to represent, he's in his hospital bed alone, it's a holiday, and a friend brings him his first glimpse of a Dungeons and Dragons book. We need to focus on identifying what's the visual.
Jonathan, if you want to talk a little bit about how it was to collaborate with Ryan, how it was to tell some vulnerable parts of your story and then kind of see your story in someone else's hands.
So it's been just a joy to work with Ryan on this project. He taught me so much about writing a script. I'd never done that before. So that was a really exciting experience, a new skill set that he helped me acquire. My memoir as a first person, as Ryan said, there wasn't dialogue. I mean, all the events are there, but I had to write about, how does Ian express this? Or how does my father talk about this? But that was really fun to change the writing medium and to really focus. A lot more feelings came out because I could be a little bit analytical in my writing, being that I was trained academically to write. Again, to have this kind of creative process, to work with such talented creative writers and creators has been just a joy to do. And I always tell people when I'm writing, just write. Even if it comes out bad, you've got something and you can work from that. Because that's how I face writer's block, is I just say, okay, fine, I'm just going to start writing.
A lot of the time we spent just taking phrases like it is and turning them into it's, or you are and turning them into your, like just rewriting things from the literal remembering what happened to how people talk in something that you want the public to read. And I was also reminded how we took on translating your escaping into Dungeons and Dragons, because in the memoir, you talk about how much it meant to you to go on a campaign with friends at a certain time. But what we had to do in putting the graphic novel together is we had to figure out how we visually represent that feeling of escapism.
And again, the idea and theme of escapism is huge throughout this story and also throughout our community right now. And we were talking a little bit before in the past episodes about the power of the story and of how entertainment can be therapy and distraction and more. Patrick, I don't know if you want to start the discussion about how entertainment has helped in a therapeutic way or distraction way or a community way.
We talked a little bit about this last time, but like D&D wasn't necessarily a part of that entertainment world for me, but the world of pro wrestling was, and this other world of like superhero characters and storytelling and such heightened conflict. There was something about it that was just so compelling to me, and it would pull me out of a devastating ankle bleed for a while. You know, it would allow me to forget about a bad knee bleed until I had to shift position. And so I developed from a young age a real affinity for entertainment. And then, you know, when Ryan and I started working together, it was based on finding gaps. We talk a lot about the need to engage young people and teenagers and adolescents and those just before they begin that young adulthood transition that so often involves a lack of medical care, a lack of adequate management, a little bit of a dip in the curve, so to speak. Well, how do we engage them? And what do we do? Why don't we try entertaining them? And if we entertain them, then we have a chance at competing against the bajillion other things in the life of a young person in 2020 for attention. Once they're entertained, they'll be engaged, and then we can educate and we can empower and we can do all the other things that we all agree on are really important. But it remains my belief that if we don't start with entertainment and if we don't prioritize entertainment in our storytelling and in our tactics to try to reach people, we're missing a tremendous opportunity. And I'd argue it might actually be impossible to maximize an opportunity if you don't include entertainment as a piece of the total puzzle.
Entertainment is so valuable to our mental health and to going through personal struggles, to help going through the day, to help inspire us, to have a new creative idea. Jonathan, something I wanted to ask you about was a little bit of this difference between the generation coming up talks about entertainment with the idea of zoning out. And Dungeons and Dragons is something where you can't do that. And so this form of entertainment, specifically with Dungeons and Dragons, how it can kind of sharpen your creative juices, your imagination, the way that you are able to get energy even from it.
It is a very engaged activity. It is full of imagination. It is full of other worlds and opportunities, and really things are unlimited as far as what you could do. I mean, I always talk about the fact that the key to Dungeons and Dragons is the dungeon master sets the stage, and then he turns to the players and says, so what do you want to do? It's up to the players to make the story come alive. So everyone has to participate. One of the other things you really learn is you can't do it alone. You need a party acting together to overcome an obstacle. And that's a really powerful message, you know, that a single player isn't going to be able to defeat the dragon. It's going to take the whole team, the whole community, the whole party acting together and working together and knowing the strengths of one another and trusting one another. Those are really important skills that you kind of pick up through playing in Dungeons and Dragons. And it frankly makes you closer with the people that you play with. It really heightens that friendship.
I love that about the game. And I also love how I've only been playing it for a little bit, but in the beginning, I was always trying to play it for the dungeon master. So I was always kind of trying to play like, okay, I think he wants me to do this, or like, oh, he's trying to get us to go to this tavern. So, and I remember kind of telling my dungeon master that, and he was like, I'm not doing anything. He's like, I'm waiting for you to do something and then I'm reacting to you. So you actually need to make your own decisions and do what you think would be right for your character. I think that's a bit of my personality. I really do like to people please. I can get into that habit. And so it was actually great for me even to be like, oh, right, like this is my story. I get to help write it. Especially right now, going through what we all are going through with COVID, it's hard to feel in control with anything. And so to kind of be forced to be in control of this one thing, this one decision, this one campaign is actually really a nice mental break.
You know, kind of along those lines, Katharine, thinking about how COVID has changed entertainment and the impact it's had on things like the ability to play D&D and maybe the need for things like D&D to bring people together. I'm reminded too how there's always opportunity no matter what the limitations are. So for Jonathan in his story, he talks about this when he was struggling at some point, recognizing that his imagination was something that couldn't be taken away from him, that he could grab that pen and release some of that emotion through his writing of stories. That's an incredible thing to realize. Right now, yes, it's difficult to produce entertainment, right? So the longer COVID goes on, the more it's like, we don't have a whole lot left in the can. We've been releasing everything we had. But, we have a friend and colleague, a guy named Keith Powell, who has a new show on NBC's streaming network, the Peacock. I'm doing a nice plug for Keith now. But it's a show him and his wife created. It's filmed entirely with iPhones in their house. The scenes with other couples are entirely via Zoom. But it's a fictional show, but it's living in the present world, and they're using what they have to make something beautiful. I think it's also easy, whether dealing with a medical illness or considering the limitations of a time like the pandemic. I'm certainly someone who can be sensitive when the limitations feel overbearing, when the cage feels like it's closing in, and I don't know where to put my energy, and I feel like I don't have access to the things that I identify with as being me in the world. But the truth is that there's always opportunity. What can be challenging is that I, as a human, have to be willing to understand that as a circumstance changes, I need to change in order to reach the same goal that I once had. The goal perhaps has not changed, but the means whereby and the path has. But I can get stubborn. I don't want to use the pen. I want to use a camera. I want to go out there. I want to do this instead. Like, well, that's nice, but that's not what's available. So if you're not able to be more flexible, then it's a you problem, Patrick. It's not actually a problem of lack of opportunity. And I have to remind myself of that sometimes. I have to be open and flexible to working within the circumstances that exist. And if I'm willing to do that, there is always opportunity.
The idea of being flexible is so key right now.
Yeah.
I definitely think that a lot of people have felt that this year was a waste or this year didn't count. And I don't agree with that. I think that people have actually stepped up to this year, and I've seen an incredible amount of creativity. And honestly, it's really inspired me how especially the art community and the entertainment community stepped up during this crisis.
There's ways that entertainers and artists are just being clever and being flexible, and that's the move. It's not just artists. Health changes all the time. It's not a static place. Of course, there are times that are far better than others, but it's not just one flat note. So if we're not willing to be flexible, to remember, set your goals, set your intentions, know what you're driving at, know who you are and what you're about. Everything else in the world around you may change. And if you have those fundamentals taken care of, you can cope with all the rest of that.
Ryan, as we're talking about your collaboration with Jonathan on this story, on the graphic novel, I'm really interested about how you decided who was going to illustrate. I know that there are a couple illustrators, and why you felt that you needed two and how you think that it worked out with the final product.
We put out a pretty wide net to try and find artists who had some experience drawing fantastical worlds, D&D specifically, but more importantly, fantastical worlds that kind of felt like their own. We wanted to find somebody with a really individual voice, really individual style. And so we found Allison Conway, who had done some really amazing illustration work for Vice, the Boston Globe, and various other publications. Her style just had something that was very unique to her, and it was detailed and colorful and specific. I think pretty early on, however, we realized that to make the Dungeons and Dragons elements pop and feel authentic to people who participate in Dungeons and Dragons, they follow those artists on Instagram, they follow D&D players on Instagram. We needed a second artist to really make those moments in the story pop on their own, and to show Jonathan's mind going from the real world where he is in a campaign with friends around a table to he is lost in the campaign and the campaign is sweeping him away. So in order to really sell that transition, we wanted two distinct artists, and that led us to find Shel Khan. One of the things that's really interesting about the two artists is Allison is a professional illustrator. It is literally her day job, 40, 50 hours a week. And Shel does her D&D illustrations on a commission basis in her spare time because she loves them. not only did we find artists who have two very different styles, we found artists who had two very different approaches to the work, but both very passionate in their own very specific, different directions.
I found both illustrations to just be so incredibly detailed and colorful, and it made me feel like I was in a different place. I wanted to pause our conversation here to introduce our special guest. He's the original artist of the Dungeons & Dragons game, the man whose artwork drew us in and inspired our gameplay. Here's some of our conversation with the legend, Larry Elmore.
I love drawing. I try to draw everything. And by the time I got in third grade, something like that, my fellow students would call me an artist. You know, I could draw better than they could. I got in trouble in the first grade, second grade, well, all my grades for drawing and not paying attention. I was crazy about drawing. Well, I never stopped. Got out of high school, went to college, majoring in art, and I didn't know anything about artists. I just like to draw. So here I was majoring in art. The instructor asked, who are my two favorite artists? And I said, well, Norman Rockwell and Frank Frazetta. And they laughed. Everybody laughed. Students laughed at me. The teacher laughed at me. And I didn't know what they was laughing about. Well, the instructor said, well, Norman Rockwell is just a cheap commercial illustrator. He's not an artist. He said, this Frazetta guy, I've never heard of him. Who is he? I said, well, he does a paperback book covers. So the instructor said, so you want to be a cheap commercial illustrator? I said, yeah, I guess so. Because I didn't want to, all the other students, they would say, abstract expressionist, just every kind of abstract modern art you could think of. And with me, I said, I want to paint adventure pictures. There wasn't such a thing as fantasy art at the time. And I said, I want to paint paintings of adventure. By the time I was a senior in college, I was picked as a top 10 artist, and I got a scholarship to Pratt in New York to get a master's degree there. And if I'd got a master's degree there, I could have got a job just about any place. But I got drafted in January. But it worked out better. It did work out better because I got to paint and draw adventure things, and Celtic and Vikings and whatever else you want to dream up, and dragons and everything.
How did Dungeons & Dragons come into your life? What originally drew you to Dungeons & Dragons specifically?
Well, the first almost year in the Army, I got stationed at Fort Knox, which is only about 50 miles from my house, working in the printing place and the art. They made books and military training manuals from scratch, from typing it to illustrations to printing it and everything. And so I was signed there as an illustrator. They liked my work so much that when you get out of the Army, come back here and we'll give you a job as illustrator in civil service. And they hired me. So I really learned about printing, publishing, everything. Old school, it was done, color separations. I mean, all this really helped me in the future too, understanding the process of printing. And also developing a pen and ink technique, a really good one. And I just honed my skills there. And then while I was there, it's probably about 74, 75, I started sending my portfolio out. And I got to work for National Lampoon magazine. And that was back when it was very, very popular. I had a huge circulation. I had illustrations in several issues. And then Heavy Metal magazine was owned by the same people as National Lampoon. And I bought the first Heavy Metal that had come out. I was collecting them, man. I was reading every one of them. And it only been out maybe less than a year. And I found out that that the National Lampoon people owned Heavy Metal. And with a Heavy Metal, I didn't know, I'd painted a painting I thought they could use. I didn't know how to show it to them. I just wrapped the painting up. I had their address and FedExed it to them. And they called me back and they said, we love your painting. We're going to use it. Don't send any originals in like that. Send us photos or something and let us decide. And then you send the original. Like, okay. So I had to learn everything from scratch. I had no one to teach me. At work, we hired a new guy, and he was playing this new game called Dungeons & Dragons. I'd heard about the game, but I didn't know anything about it. So he said, so let's play a game. I'm like, okay, I like games. At lunch hour, it took us a week to roll up characters, I'm like, God, what kind of a crazy game is this? And so finally, it got time to play. My character, I'm a short guy, so I had a dwarf fighter. I was always a fighter. I mean, it seemed like everything I got in life, I had to fight for. And so we started the game, and we loved it. Got around the game. He was the one. He was showing us art, and he had some of the old stuff too. He said, I think they need better art. He said, I think all of us can draw better than this. And I'd done a lot of oil paintings already, and they said, you could paint better than this. And I'm like, well, they probably want that look. He said, I don't think they do. He said, I think this company is small, just starting up. And he said, they're probably just going down the street getting somebody that can draw a little bit and use them. And the first stuff that was published, that's exactly what did happen. The early stuff. Just, do you have a cousin or something that can draw? Yeah, okay, draw this. But anyway, he said, I'm going to send some samples of my work in, and anybody else want to give me some samples, I'll send their work in. He had their address, and I wasn't going to do it. And he kept bugging me. His artwork, when he just drew for himself, looked just like anime, except for the big eyes. But nobody ever heard of anime then, and he hadn't. But anyway, they didn't like his work, but they liked mine. I painted a painting for them and sent it to them, and they liked it. Then they wanted to hire me, and I said no. Then they wanted to fly me up and look at their company and everything. So I thought, well, I'll do that. So he flew my wife and I up there, and everybody there was young. I was like 31 or something, but they were, in their early 20s and stuff. So I went back home, and my wife and I talked about it and said, I don't know if I want to put my whole future in the hands of a bunch of kids, So then I got another call at work, and they said, the president of the company, which is Kevin Bloom, I think at that time, is going to fly down to Louisville. Can you pick him up at the airport? And he wants to talk to you just one night, and then can you take him back to the airport? And I said, yeah, sure. And so I did that. So we fed him supper, and as a good Southerners, we got coffee and cake out. My wife cleaned the table off, and we sitting there. And he said, and he just went right to it. He said, how much money you make where you're working at now? I said, I'm making a little over $20,000 a year. He said, I'll double it. That's in 1979. You're going to double my salary? $40,000 a year, my God. I said, my wife works. I said, she makes $12,000. He said, we'll double that. 64,000. That's like making 250,000 a year now. I'm like, holy cow, this guy's nuts. And I said, well, we just bought this house. He said, don't worry about it. We'll buy it and sell it for you, or we'll take care of it. And he said, if you say yes, we'll have a house waiting for you to move into in Lake Geneva. I looked at my wife, and I wasn't ready for this. I was ready to say no. And she gave me that wifely look like, hey, it's pretty good. And so I looked at her and I said, I guess you just bought yourself an artist. And so about 2 months later, I was in Wisconsin.
Your work suggests such emotion with it. It has such real danger and drama, and things really jump off the page. That must have been new and kind of revolutionary in the time of illustrating. Can you speak about that a little bit?
I looked at a lot of pictures on the covers of books. When I was young, I never dreamed I could be an illustrator. Those are special people in New York and other big cities that done that. Me, just a rural Kentucky boy, he'd probably never be able to do something. But that was my dream. It's like if you have a dream of winning the lottery, okay, that's like my winning the lottery dream. And thinking it'll never happen, but I still pushed for it. I fought for it. Because if there's a slim chance it might happen, it's worth trying, When I was growing up, I had some cousins and some neighbor kids. When we all got together, there was about 8 of us, I guess. There's a hardcore of 4 of us that we tried to do everything that was scary in our lives. We'd climb cliffs just with your old jeans on, t-shirt, and tennis shoes, nothing else. We'd get stuck on the side of a cliff. One of us would. I did a couple of times. Couldn't go up and couldn't go down, and they couldn't help you. And we knew if we went for help and got our parents, we'd be in trouble for doing something that stupid. So you'd have to figure out a way by yourself to get down. I remember being stuck and crying, like, I'm going to die. They're going to find a skeleton here on the side of this cliff. But somehow I got my way out of it. And that sense of adventure and risk, I think adrenaline flowing and everything comes into focus sharper. It's just a rush. I still like to do that today. All my life, I've seek that adrenaline rush. And I think that kind of outside adventure, the rush, the thrill, my cousins and my friends, and we had big enough imaginations. Maybe there is a monster in here, and maybe we'll find a dragon or something. I like stories too. I like my art. When I do a good painting, it sort of tells a story, or you can make up a story looking at it. So when I'm doing a painting, a story comes to my mind as I'm doing it, and I start thinking about the story, who these characters are and where they're going, what trouble they got in and how. And I don't know, it's just, I guess I was a natural born illustrator. The first time I did something I really knew was fantasy is I was doing a big painting, which did win some awards around here in the state. I had an army of warriors in the wintertime coming across the snow and a stronghold on top of a hill. At that time, I didn't know exactly what Vikings and Celtic really looked like that much in clothing, and what little I did know, I thought, well, it don't look exciting enough, so I'll just make it more exciting. And I knew that Celts didn't build big castles. That come later on out of stone. They built stuff out of wood. I thought, well, crap, a wooden fortress up here won't look as cool as a castle of some type. So I painted a big castle like up there. So it was fantasy. It was pure fantasy. And I thought, hey, I like this. I can make up anything I want to. I'm going to do that all the time. So that was, I guess, my first painting that was pure fantasy. But that was a time I was realizing that I could just call it fantasy and paint what I wanted to.
Larry, I got into D&D in '82. So
Yeah.
just around the time that you were getting involved. And my friends and I in California, we went out and bought those Dragon magazines as soon as they came to the store.
Yeah.
We'd see those covers and it would inspire us to create our own adventures, somewhat based on the imagination we saw in your paintings. And I just was curious if you ever got a sense of that your work was having that kind of impact.
No, I didn't.
Wow, what a story. Larry has experienced so much, and fans and players of the game, I think I speak for all of us when I say his artwork has really inspired generations of gameplay and imagination. Let's hop back in with Ryan and Patrick. Ryan, when you're thinking of an audience reading this, who are you hoping to reach?
As much as I think we all hope the D&D community loves this story and the graphic novel itself and Jonathan's obvious love for it, the starting point, and for me, the only way that this is successful, is how does this project reach 8 to 18-year-old young people with a bleeding disorder? I know we're going to put a lot of energy and effort into reaching people beyond that, but the starting point is, one, to engage them in learning about the history of their community in a way that they haven't been engaged with before, because a lot of the teaching about the blood contamination crisis, often referred to as the hemophilia holocaust, a lot of the teaching about that is understandably focused on the facts of what happened and maybe not individual personal stories. And I think there's a case to be made that both need to exist to reach as many people as possible. You do need dry, specific, harsh, detailed, traditional education about it. But I think to complement that with something that is entertainment, I think is incredibly valuable. It's like the premise of Believe Limited. It's the premise of everything we do. It's entertainment to affect change. It's entertainment to create impact, to create movement in a way that the traditional education just doesn't. So, I think there will be a lot of effort and energy to reach as many people as possible, as many D&D fans as possible, as many young people as possible. But if the feedback we get is that there's an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old in the community that read this and for the first time understood, connected with, was moved by the history of the community, and hopefully felt inspired of all the things Jonathan had to overcome. And he is still out there as an advocate for the community, living his best life. This is so specific, but like the amount of exercise that Jonathan does. I see the Facebook posts, 2,000 meters, 2,500 meters swam. I find it inspiring. And so I just hope that that's who we're reaching first and foremost. That to me will be the biggest success.
Something I'm also excited about, and I'm interested to hear you speak to also, Jonathan, is your peer group. I'm curious to hear the other people who have experienced similar beats that you have to hear what it has meant to them. I just know how many people have stories that run parallel to yours. And, to Ryan's point, our target is a younger group to help them with what it means to identify with this thing and how health and life changes over time. And that's extraordinarily important. But then I go to the other end too, and I think about the guys who are 50, 60 and older, and what is this going to mean to them?
I have to tell you, the people I know in the community that are in my generation, so to speak, of the bleeding disorders community are really excited about it. The good news is they like visual things too. So I bet they're a lot like Katharine, and maybe they've read a few comic books in their day. One of the people that were really encouraging me to keep writing, to keep telling my story and finding a way to bring it out was Val Bias. He's a good friend of mine. He was my camp director. He was my camp counselor at hemophilia camp. He was so involved with the advocacy that we all went through in the 90s to try and get recognition for the contamination crisis and some compensation through the Ricky Ray Act. And he was in Washington the whole time. And that's covered briefly in this story, which I'm very happy about. When I met with him back in 2018 and 2019, he just kept saying to me, keep writing. Keep writing. This is important, John. It is your journey, but it's also our whole community's journey. And I think it'll connect with people in the community. And it's important to get these stories out here because unfortunately, there's less and less of us around. We lost so many people. Thousands of people died. It really is a tragedy. But if there's any way we can continue to tell the story and continue to honor the pain and the sacrifice they went through, I'm all on board with that. I often will use a tag, never again, never forget, when I'm talking about the bleeding disorders community, because I never want to forget the people we lost. I never want this to happen again. And that's all about advocacy, being involved, being aware of what's going on, and making sure that we're looking out for the best interests of our community.
Yes, I think this story really does bring to light history and brings to light not only your story, but the community story at large. I wanted to talk a little bit about, Jonathan, after your liver transplant, how that journey was for you, about how it affected your hemophilia, and then what it was like to tell the community about that as well.
Turns out when I got my liver transplant, I no longer had hemophilia. I was born with severe hemophilia A, factor VIII deficiency. And as part of receiving a new liver, the protein is produced in the liver. So I received the factor that the donor would have originally created for himself. So I don't have hemophilia anymore, which I tell people is super weird. I spent my whole life learning how to advocate for myself, how to take responsibility for my own medical care, around hemophilia. And suddenly it's all gone. It's amazing. It's great to not have to infuse every week. It's also kind of hard to accept at times. I have had some other pain issues over the past couple of years, and I'm always convinced it's a bleed, and I'm calling my old hematologist, Dr. T, and saying, no, I must have an inhibitor. It must be something's wrong because it feels like a muscle bleed. I know what a muscle bleed feels like. I've had them for 47 years. And we've done all sorts of tests, and I don't have an inhibitor, and I don't have any unusual factor deficiency. And along with that, there's some degree of loss. Your life has kind of been built around taking care of yourself and taking responsibility and advocating. And I started to ask my questions like, what do I do now? Am I still part of the bleeding disorders community? Will I be accepted? Or will they say you don't belong here anymore? Those are kind of hard questions. The good news, as Randy Curtis will tell you, I still have the limp. So I still fit in the bleeding disorders community. That's what he told me. But beyond that, I realized, no, I have shared history. I have shared experiences. And frankly, I have an opportunity now to share those and hopefully impact others and encourage others to get involved, to step up, to take responsibility for your own medical care, but also to help the greater community and make sure that everybody's getting the care and access to care that they deserve and that the care is safe and all those sorts of things. I mean, I almost died. I waited for 10 years for that liver transplant. It's an awful long time. A lot of people don't get an organ transplant. Unfortunately, they die because there's so many people that need one. So I really considered this amazing gift, a second chance or a second chapter in my life. And I want to honor that gift. I want to honor the sacrifice of the donor and, the fact that he was able to help me and help others. It's just amazing. And I want to live it to the fullest. I've been swimming like crazy 4 nights a week, about a mile every night. Right now, I've done about 90 miles this year. It's just great to be able to do that. It's also great to be back involved with my family, to be able to interact and participate in the life events. I missed out a lot because I was so sick. So I'm just so thankful for this opportunity.
You mentioned, like, do I fit in the bleeding disorders community anymore? And I get a kind of miffed when I hear parents of people 18 or younger, and usually younger, who may say, oh, that was a long time ago. I don't want to hear about that anymore. Like, you will hear people say things like that once in a while. But I don't, number one, think that's the majority opinion. And number two, like, I'm sorry, but that's crap. You just said before, never forget, never again. If we don't want to deal with the history so recent that those who lived through it are still in the room, then I guarantee you will step right into another bear trap at some point. You have fundamentally misunderstood the point of advocacy and community. And if you don't have room for somebody's story, it's a story. And if you don't have room for it, maybe you are the person who actually is having a tough time figuring out what this room is supposed to be about. And again, like, I appreciate that if you had a kid in 2014, that HIV and hepatitis and liver disease and all of this is not a part of your family's history. It wasn't until now. And now you belong to a new reality. You got a diagnosis, and with it comes a whole bunch of stuff, including this history. You can't just choose to selectively take the history that makes you feel good about the condition and leave the rest behind. To put a fine point on this, fast forward 10 years from now, and if someone who has undergone gene therapy feels like, the rhythm I had in the hemophilia community, like, it's different for me now. Okay, like, if you personally, individual choice, relate to this thing differently because you have changed, that sounds like growth. That sounds like life. But that's an individual's choice. To tell people that there's no room here for you because your experience with this thing isn't my experience with this thing, I have feelings about that, and this felt like the moment to share it. So thank you, Jonathan, for giving me that opportunity.
Believe Limited especially, it has, their global mission of making sure that everyone not only feels included, but is part of the community and has their own story to say.
I'm not a community member, but I like to joke that I feel like an adopted community member at this point. It's obviously an honor. I think one of the biggest challenges we face, so just speaking as sort of an outsider, but someone who likes to be an adopted community member in this community, one of the biggest challenges we face every single time we start a new project, or every time someone pitches a new project to us to undertake, is how do we want to speak about this and to whom? Because bleeding disorders don't discriminate. They affect across every possible demographic. Even if we're forgetting about the international work we do in the US, they affect every possible demographic. So it's a huge challenge to figure out how to educate through entertainment, whether it's podcasts, books, live events, because you want to get across information that's helpful to everybody, but every demographic receives information differently. And then within every demographic, you have the whole world of interests, even something as universally within the community helpful and beneficial as the Bloodstream podcast, right? We're constantly asking ourselves how to take information that affects everybody and make it engaging to podcast listeners. How do we understand what that demographic is? So it's just a constant challenge.
Yes, for sure. And I think a common theme that we've been talking about is advocacy and how it's very powerful. And also it's something that can seem intimidating. But, if there is someone listening right now that doesn't know how to start, what are some small steps that someone can take to start being brave and start advocating without thinking that it has to go from 0 to 100?
Start with yourself. Most of us are not our own best advocates. We don't understand our options within our healthcare, our plans for insurance, our bodies and what the actual needs may be. We don't understand these things nearly as well as we could. And if we get curious about those things and try to move toward better health, inevitably we wind up learning things, and we wind up also in conversations with doctors and nurses and social workers, and they have little aha moments, and then they go and they serve their other patients. I have come across so many stories of patients or parents who had either a trickiness with a diagnosis or a particularly unusual circumstance or surgery they had to prepare for. So they were consulting with different people, and just in the service of trying to make the best decision for themselves and their own family, they wound up discovering things, and then were able to share that information with that treatment center and with that patient advocacy group, and they did a presentation about it. And so many times it doesn't start with this idea of I'm going to go change the world, or I'm going to go do things for other people, or it's time for me to give back. So many times it's just a result of learning something, and then an awareness that like, oh, other people might be able to benefit from this. So I would start with as small as yourself.
I think as somebody who came in new to the community, I didn't come in wanting to be an advocate. I came in wanting to improve one thing with you. With Stop the Bleeding, you showed me there are young people out there, and what they are handed when they are being educated about their bleeding disorder are pamphlets. And that is ineffectual in a million different ways. We know how to make funny videos, so let's do funny videos instead.
Yep.
And through just engaging, what I realized is the challenge was so much greater, so much wider, and across so many more demographics that we could actually do 50 different things over the course of, we've been in business 8 or 9 years now. We could do 50 or 60 different things and still not be reaching everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And that turned me into an advocate. Through that simple first step of engaging, what I learned radicalized me to every single thing that's being handed out or put online or taught to the community. I now immediately look at and think, how could we do it better? How could we have more objective, tangible results to show from that piece of education? So just to your point, just that first step, even as a somewhat outsider, that first step of becoming educated was the light bulb moment that turned me into an advocate. And I think to your question, Katharine, I think even if people aren't asking, how can I become an advocate? I think that question, how can I learn a little bit more, can turn you into an advocate, because once you start learning, your heart will tell you which direction to run.
I think both your points are great. Look at yourself and say, I have these gifts. I'm artistic in this way. One of the great things I found working with Believe Limited has been the willingness to embrace creative expression as a way to educate and to advocate. I've met other community members that are musicians. At least one that I know has started writing some songs about his bleeding disorders. And maybe that'll reach people in another way. My gift is in writing, and that's been so wonderful to be able to connect my writing and my love of Dungeons and Dragons with my belief in how important advocacy is. Whatever your gift might be, just go with it. There might be a way to use your gift.
I really think it's so inspiring just to hear what all of you have done. And also, I know for personal experience, you just need sometimes that extra push or that extra self-belief or that extra almost like daring yourself. Like, I think I can do this, or I wonder what would happen if I just tried. As we're wrapping things up, I wanted to talk a bit about the audio version as well. Patrick, I know that you are voicing Jonathan from a very young age to an older age and going through an incredible journey with so many different struggles and landmarks. How has that been for you?
Fun. There's a unique challenge there in the age range, and it is audio only. It was a lot of fun and highly collaborative. Josh Bragg on our team is overseeing that project, and he and I just spent hours on Zoom together while I was recording, and we'd do some takes. He'd give notes, do some more takes. Sometimes it can be really hard to play when you're working on material, especially that's got some toughness to it, that's got some difficulty. The idea of playing and being like receptive to play and to moving energy is not where the instinct always wants to go. But I've just been grateful that it's a great story converted into a few now great pieces of media. And I had a very specific thing to do, which was give Jonathan's journey justice in performance as best I could.
Jonathan, how has this audio version been for you, not only to participate, but to listen to your story in a different way?
I really have no idea what this is going to be. In the end, I'm really excited to see. It was exciting to get involved to write a graphic novel. And now we're doing it in a whole different medium. There's notes in the script about sounds. So I'm really curious, what are these monsters going to sound like or whatever? What's this clashing swords going to sound like? Can't wait to hear it. As far as getting to participate as an actor, first of all, I was really honored that they would ask me to do that. A little bit scared, I'll be honest. I haven't really had any acting experience since high school. So it's been a while. And also, I was really honored to play my dad. He's such an important figure in my life. He's always been there for me. He's helped me to learn how to advocate for myself. He's been part of that team. He's always, helped me when I've fallen down and helped me get back up and get refocused. So I hope he likes it.
I'm sure he will. Well, this has been so great to be able to know that not only is it a graphic novel, but there's also an audio version, and to dig really deep into the origin of Blood of the Paladin and be excited to see where it goes. Ryan, do you know where people could find it if they wanted a copy?
Yes, through our contact form at bloodofthepaladin.com, you will be able to request a free copy to be mailed to you starting in February. So you can request it now. We're going to track everyone's requests, and then we will start shipping these the first week of February.
Wow, just 8 episodes, and I feel like we have lived a lifetime over this past month. Thank you so much to all of our guests, our editors, our producers and social team, the designers and artists, the writers, to everyone who has made this podcast and the graphic novel possible. And especially thank you to Jonathan Hill for sharing his inspiring story so that we can all be inspired to find the Paladin within. This has been incredible. I hope to join you all on another amazing adventure soon. But for now, I'm Katharine Chen-Lerner, signing off.
Blood of the Paladin is a Bloodstream Media production made possible by BioMarin. Hosted by Katharine Chen-Lerner and Jonathan Hill and adapted for your ears by me, Joshua Sterling Bragg. The graphic novel Blood of the Paladin was written by Jonathan Hill with Ryan Gielen, based on Jonathan's true life story. Special thanks to the editors that helped me put this together, Allison Stoney and Christina Penny, and to the incredible cast and crew at Believe Limited that helped bring this story to life. Episodes of this podcast were directed by me, Joshua Sterling Bragg, produced by Greg Holtzman and Katharine Chen-Lerner, and executive produced by Ryan Gielen. If you want to hear more podcasts like this one, check out bloodstreammedia.com, where you can find podcasts about bleeding disorders, gene therapy, community stories, menstruation, pain and how we deal with it, and so much more. That's bloodstreammedia.com.